the people over at the New York Stock Exchange are threatening that they might move to Dallas, presuming Dallas has electricity. This story is a week old. So,
well, okay. So are they really threatening to move? I mean, this is really, what is this about? It's again, we're not a political show, but sometimes we have to talk about business in a taxation state way.
Well, no, I mean, listen, we're not a political show, but this is a reality of business and marketplace.
It
taxes.
is.
And that encourages, listen, there is a throng of people moving to Puerto Rico now.
I know a couple of them.
I know you do.
Already live in Puerto Rico because of the 4% flat tax rate that you pay there.
And it's an interesting strategy of like, and listen, I know people that are moving to Texas, and they moved to Texas with a job, with their existing job, and they're like, I just got a 30% raise.
Well,
right?
Sure. Cost of living and no state tax, right?
And between the two, and like people like myself, we might complain about the property taxes in Texas, but if you're coming off the East Coast, I mean, who cares?
Or West Coast.
Insignificant. Yeah, if it's insignificant, right? I came from the Midwest to Texas, and I was just like, going from 6 or 5 or 4% to 10 is like, what in the world? But it all balances out because it's warm and stuff sometimes.
But here's the actual story. The reason this is a story is because New York, obviously, as a state and a city, has been ravaged by Dos Equis in the last 14 months. The city,
Correct.
The commercial, everything. As a state, they're looking at a massive loss as far as tax revenue year over year.
Yeah.
So what is one of the things that is obviously based in the state of New York, and that happens every single day, right?
Yeah.
So
5 days a week.
Right. So they've proposed initiating that, oh, by the way, was a thing up until like 1980 or 1981 when the state passed a rule saying that they were capping what they would do it. And essentially it's a transaction tax. The New York State wants to tax every transaction of the New York Stock Exchange, both big and small, at a microscopic rate, right? Microscopic.
Right.
And they want to do it to increase. And the New York Stock Exchange essentially is getting ahead of it by saying, hey, we can go somewhere else. We don't have to stay here in New York.
And let me just say this much to the wider dialogue about this is just like, the danger of introducing taxes to a group of people. We're going to talk about, we have another story too that's coming after this that is in the similar vein, but like when it's one thing to say, hey, we're a tourist industry and we have to be in Florida, right?
Sure.
It's another thing to say we're at this point, a lot of what happens in the stock market is virtual. A lot of the trading is done over computers. You don't need to be on a floor somewhere.
Everything's done by computers, even on the floor in today's world, right? I mean, everything is done.
So I'm saying that something is better than nothing. And unless you create a system in which people have to stay, like, California attempted to propose a tax where you can leave, but we get to tax you for 10 years after you leave.
Sure.
But the point is that people, it lacks creativity. It shows that this is just like,
okay, let's make it clear. Danny doesn't believe in taxes at all.
Of course I don't.
So Danny doesn't believe in taxes at all, but which I say Danny doesn't believe. I wholeheartedly believe in taxes as long as they're used for what they're supposed to be used for. But here's the point is, there's actually
you can believe in whatever utopian make-believe Santa Claus magic you want to believe
whatever
in.
You say.
Free country.
The point is there's a federal, actually, this has been looked into since the GameStop thing, right, and stuff like this. The federal government is looking to increase taxes as well, and they're looking at creative ways to do it. And there's actually a bill that has a very similar to what New York State is trying to impose, trying to do it on a national level, which then, again, the New York Stock Exchange wouldn't have a choice because they couldn't leverage the state. Now, will it actually pass? Who knows? But that would be one way. One of the reasons hedge funds, these big funds, get away with what they're doing is their transactions, large and small, are not taxed as long as they fall under certain umbrellas.
Yeah.
Even from a real estate investment standpoint, there's something called a 1031 exchange that you can do to essentially kick your taxes down the curb as long as you're not taking any money out.
Some of the larger funds will set it up to where they're like, yeah, we're just going to kick the taxes down the road until the guy who's organizing, the main shareholder, just croaks.
Which is never, right? They're kicking it down the curb till never, right?
Right. And then they just take a loan out, right? And then they create the liquidity through debt.
Right. Because they're never going to sell all their investment properties, which is what the 1031 exchange is for.
Here's the ultimate problem, right? The entrepreneur, the innovator, the businessman, right? Always one step ahead of the tax man. He's always one step ahead of the law.
By design.
Well, they're always going to go, for instance, like we're talking about right now, well, if we make a tax here, we'll go somewhere else. Right? And Puerto Rico will go, hey, we're a U.S. territory. We can leverage that and tell people who live in the mainland and say, hey, if you relocate to Puerto Rico and export your business to the mainland or to another, then we don't charge you any taxes. Effectively, it's a couple points, right? And, if you're moving from California and you go from California to Puerto Rico, which the boxer and YouTuber Logan Paul says he's going to do now. It's absurd, and so that ability to move around creates a scenario where, hey, the New York Stock Exchange might go, oh, they're going to impose a federal tax on our transactions. We're based out of Turks and Caicos now, and so it's a situation where it's too little too late, right? And the lack of forethought and going, hey, we're going to, whatever happened at Dos Equis was one of those things where no one could have predicted these events taking place. And it created a groundswell of competition among states, which I think is ultimately healthy for you and I, the regular average multimillionaire Joe, So I'm talking about myself. Big man has a little ways to go on being a multimillionaire.
When we I own a company. I own parts of a bunch, but I own a company myself. And why did I set up that company? Is because that company, as far as the IRS tax and the United States government, is an entity. They treat it just like as a person.
It's a person, yeah.
It's a person, right? And there's benefits to doing that, because they treat it like a person. And when you start doing that and you create all of these loopholes and all of these big things, like you said, business is always ahead of the tax man. That's by design, right? Again, this is where it comes from simplified reforms to taxes that I'm a big fan of. You should simplify it. But
I mean, I used to be in that category of like, hey, if we just make this a one-page return, make it uncomplicated, lower rates, without write-offs, and just say you can't write anything off, but the rate's going to a flat 10 or something like that.
Whatever the math would have to be.
Whatever the math is, it makes a lot of sense, and the math works. But the point is, again, we're not a political show, but hey, business and politics intersect a lot. The average Joe, you and I, it's the tax is not written by us, right? The tax laws are not written by us. And the tax laws are written by the people who are benefiting the most from them. So,
well, and that's why New York will not pass this rule, because Wall Street's in New York. There's going to be a lot of money pushed against it,
and there's already a kind of an exodus taking place to Miami. So there's a couple companies who are moving operations to Florida.
There's an exodus happening in New York, period. Because people they don't know. I've read several articles on this in the last 6 months. There are talks about New York City becoming the next Detroit. that people and businesses are exiting at such a rate
Yeah.
that it just can't sustain itself.
Yeah, this is the first time in American history, I believe, or like in 50 years, where the rents went down in New York City, and the general vacancy rate of commercial, residential, and high rises is on the rise. It's going up. There's a lot of people who believe that's a good thing, because that means the artists and the weirdos or whatever will move back to New York. And I did read an article recently, like, hey, if you're a struggling, starting off musician, don't move to Austin, move to New York. And I agree with that. Don't move to Austin. Don't move to Texas. Just don't do it.
Danny's saying that for selfish reasons, folks, not economic reasons. So,
That's
no,
correct.
move to Austin if you want to. But yeah,
no,
look,
don't.
I hope
but if
that
you do,
New York
call the big man.
comes back stronger than it did in the past and stuff like that. But again, right now, it's not showing signs of that. Commercials.
Let me give you a statistic.
Yes.
In 1960, the wealthiest city in the world, big man, the entire globe, was the city called Detroit, Michigan. Right?
No doubt.
And it's a third world country. It's a third world city. I have family there. I used to go to the suburbs of Michigan every year, twice a year, for holidays, for Christmas, and then once in the summer, for Christmas or Thanksgiving, and then one time in the summer. It's like I consider it my second hometown, more so than the place where I spent most of my life. Okay, which is St. Paul, the suburbs of St. Paul, Minnesota. I actually have because I'm a car guy, and there's a certain grit that the city has. I almost went and worked there for Quicken Loans. I got hired at Quicken Loans and then didn't go to work there. Oops. And I still remember, like, at the top of Quicken Tower, if you just look out at the city, that when the light hits that abject poverty in the right way, it's just something special about it. But
something magical.
Yeah, but listen, the city of Detroit attempted to do the exact same kind of similar thing.
Yeah.
Where they're like, well, any business in the city of Detroit pays a 1% income tax. Well, guess what? If you head out to the suburbs of Detroit, like Troy, Michigan, you're going to see a phenomenon which is otherwise, like, to me, odd. High rises in the middle of a suburb. Like, down the street, like next to the highway, here's a couple of high rises. And then 2 blocks away is just big residential homes. Why? Because they're outside of city limits. So there is, there's an economist, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of different theories here. But and there's, there was that article written by James Altucher. He's an interesting person. He has a podcast, and basically saying that New York City might be super dead. And then Jerry Seinfeld, billionaire comedian's like, no, it's not. Like, yeah, because, you're not worried about it dying because you're in the Hamptons.
Well, but look, I don't look. I am all for that's why I think it won't succeed at state level. If it does, it would be at a national level.
The ripple effect of that law passing and the New York Stock Exchange moving anywhere. It's not simply that, who cares? A bunch of wealthy people are leaving the state. Boo-hoo. No. It is the push carts where people buy their lunch. It is the
you're
street
talking
vendors.
About Wall Street moving. That's what you're talking about. You're not talking about New York Stock Exchange moves to Dallas. That's electronic. But you're talking about people.
The people.
You're talking about people that
real
support
estate,
people,
the dump effect of the real estate. It will not be, if this happens, which again, you're saying it doesn't. I'm saying it's inevitable. I'm not saying it's happening today. I'm not saying it's happening tomorrow. And I'm not saying they're going to Dallas. I'm saying the long-term result here is it's over for them. Right?
I think, and this is a great lead into our next story. I think you're gonna see a lot of what we consider brick and mortar. Okay, like Wall Street being a place, the New York Stock Exchange being a place. I think that is what is inevitable as far as going away. The New York Stock Exchange doesn't necessarily, even in today's world, 2020, it's
21.
February 2021.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily have to be anywhere.
Right. That's so
We
true.
already have that technology, right?
Of course.
And which leads into the next story, which is what, Danny?
Well, hey, before we get into that, I want to talk about our sponsor. I'm sure you did not know this, but over here at Idiots versus Idiots, we are death peddlers. That's right.
Woo!
We peddle the death of plastic pollution. Not only does Liquid Death murder your thirst, 10% of every can sold goes to end plastic pollution, and it is a superior water delivery system. Use code IDIOTS10. It is flashing at the bottom of your screen at liquiddeath.com for 10% off today. And very quick personal testimonial. I drink so much more water because it's in a can. For some reason, it's just how it is.